The announcement came crackling over the intercom. Due to severe weather conditions, all flights are temporarily grounded. I sighed, sinking deeper into the uncomfortable plastic seat. Toronto's Pearson International Airport, usually a bustling hub of travelers, now felt like a ghost town. The storm had driven everyone away, leaving only a handful of weary souls like me stranded in the vast terminal. The terminal was dimly lit, the power fluctuating due to the storm's intensity. Emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Outside, rain pounded relentlessly against the enormous glass windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. I checked my phone, dead battery, of course. Typical, I thought, stranded without a lifeline. Desperate to occupy my mind, I wandered through the terminal, trying to find a spot where the air wasn't quite so stale. I passed by shuttered shops and darkened kiosks, the usual airport hustle replaced by an eerie silence. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. I shrugged it off. The storm had everyone on edge, myself included. Eventually, I found a corner near a large window where I could watch the tempest rage outside. The darkness was almost complete, the terminal swallowed by shadows. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to ignore the growing unease in my gut. As the minutes dragged on, I began to realize how alone I truly was, an unsettling thought that kept creeping in as the night wore on. The loudspeaker crackled again, startling me out of my thoughts. It was a reminder that there was no telling when the storm would pass and flights would resume. I needed to find some rest, but the darkness and the unsettling atmosphere made it hard to relax. I closed my eyes again, determined to get some sleep, and that's when I heard the voice. "Do you feel it?" A voice said, soft and whispering. I opened my eyes to see an elderly woman sitting across from me. Her clothes were worn and frayed, her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her eyes, though, were sharp and unsettling, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Feel what?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, though my pulse quickened. "The storm," she replied, "it's not just outside. It's in here too. This place is a trap." I glanced around, half expecting to see someone else, but we were alone. "I think you're mistaken," I said. "It's just the weather causing delays." She shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. No, she murmured, almost to herself. "There's something else. Something in the shadows." I couldn't help but feel a chill at her words, though I brushed it off. She was probably just a lonely old woman, her mind unsettled by the storm. Yet, there was something about her that made me uneasy. Her presence seemed to bring the shadows closer, pressing in like a tangible force. "Are you waiting for a flight too?" I asked, trying to change the subject. She nodded, but her answers seemed irrelevant to her. "I've been here before," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've seen what happens when the lights go out." The terminal lights flickered again, and for a moment, the darkness seemed absolute. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the sense of being watched more palpable than ever. "Be careful," she said, leaning forward. "This place is more than it seems." I managed a weak smile, unsure how to respond. Her words lingered, though, feeding into the growing sense of dread. I told myself I was being paranoid, but her warning stuck with me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. As the night dragged on, her unsettling presence remained etched in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder, was she right? Was there something more lurking in the shadows of Terminal 3? The storm continued its relentless assault on the terminal, each gust of wind rattling the massive windows as if trying to break through. I tried to dismiss the old woman's eerie words, but the terminal seemed to take on a life of its own. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that danced and writhed in the corners of my vision. As I wandered through the terminal, I noticed something peculiar, faint echoes of footsteps that didn't match my own. I stopped, straining to listen, but the sound disappeared as quickly as it came. The shadows seemed to close in, and the air grew heavy with an unsettling presence. "You're still here," a voice said, startling me. I turned to see a security guard approaching, his face impassive and professional. "You should try to find a place to rest. This storm might last a while." "Yeah, I know," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's just, something about this place feels off tonight." The guard shrugged, not seeming to care much. Storms can do that, he said, mess with your head a bit. I nodded, but his words did little to reassure me. As he walked away, I caught a glimpse of the old woman from earlier, standing at the far end of the terminal, watching me. Her presence was unnerving, yet I felt drawn to her, as if she held some unspoken truth about this place. The shadows seemed to deepen as I approached her, each step echoing in the empty space. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "The echoes," she said, "they come and go, but they're always there, lurking." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the weight of her words settling into my bones. There was something undeniably wrong about this place, something I couldn't explain. But I was determined to find out what it was, even if it meant confronting my own fears. The terminal felt even emptier than before, the storm outside intensifying as the hours dragged on. I wandered aimlessly, my thoughts consumed by the old woman's warnings and the strange occurrences that seemed to grow more frequent. It was then that I noticed it. A passenger sitting across from me had vanished, leaving behind only a backpack and a half-empty cup of coffee. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but there was no mistaking it. He was gone, as if he had never been there. Panic set in, and I searched the terminal for any sign of him. I approached a nearby couple who had been sitting a few rows away, but they, too, were gone. Their luggage remained, untouched and forgotten, like relics of a bygone era. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The terminal seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening and stretching into grotesque forms. I felt trapped, the weight of the storm and the oppressive darkness suffocating me. I rushed back to the old woman, my voice trembling as I spoke. "They're disappearing. The people, they're just gone." She looked at me with a calmness that felt out of place, given the circumstances. "I warned you," she said, "this place isn't what it seems. It takes them, one by one." Her words felt like a punch to the gut, and I struggled to comprehend the gravity of the situation. The terminal was no longer just a building, it was a living entity, feeding on those within its walls. I felt a growing sense of urgency to find a way out, to escape before it was too late. But the exit seemed impossibly far, and the shadows loomed large, as if daring me to make a move. "Help me," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do we do?" She leaned closer, her eyes boring into mine. "There's a way," she said, her voice barely audible, "but it's not easy. You'll need to trust me." Despite my fear and uncertainty, I nodded, realizing that she might be my only hope. The terminal secrets were unraveling, and I knew I had to act quickly before it claimed me too. The terminal seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the walls whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. The storm outside was relentless, a constant reminder of the isolation trapping us here. Agnes, the old woman, became my anchor amid the chaos. Her presence, once unsettling, now felt like a lifeline. "We need to find the passage," Agnes said, her voice steady yet urgent. "It's the only way out." I hesitated, glancing around the desolate terminal. It was hard to shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes tracked our every move. "A passage?" I asked, skepticism tinging my voice. Agnes nodded, gesturing for me to follow. "I've seen it before, long ago," she explained. "It's hidden, but it leads away from here." We moved through the terminal, the oppressive silence pressing down like a physical weight. Agnes led the way with a certainty that was both comforting and unnerving. Every flicker of the lights, every distant echo of a sound, set my nerves on edge. As we walked, I noticed other passengers emerging from the shadows, drawn to us like moths to a flame. They wore expressions of fear and confusion, much like my own. Among them was a young couple, a businessman, and a woman holding a child close to her chest. We were strangers bound by a shared terror, a ragtag alliance of the lost. "We've been looking for a way out," the businessman said, his voice tinged with desperation. "You think you can help?" Agnes nodded, her eyes scanning the terminal as if searching for a hidden key. "Together," she said, "we might stand a chance." The group fell in step, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I felt a flicker of hope, fragile yet undeniable. Perhaps, together, we could unravel the mystery and find a way to escape the terminal's grasp. As we neared a forgotten corner of the terminal, Agnes paused, her gaze fixed on a seemingly ordinary wall. "It's here," she whispered, reaching out to touch the cold, unyielding surface. I watched, holding my breath, as she pressed her hand against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened, and doubt crept in. But then, with a low groan, the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage hidden in the shadows. The sight was both a relief and a terror, a reminder of how little I understood about this place. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between us. We would go together, face whatever lay ahead, and perhaps find a way out. The passage was narrow and dark, the air heavy with the scent of decay. We moved cautiously, the dim light from our phones casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The sounds of the terminal faded behind us, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to amplify every breath, every footstep. Agnes led the way, her movements deliberate and sure. I followed closely, the rest of the group trailing behind, their fear palpable in the confined space. The passage twisted and turned, a labyrinthine path that seemed to defy logic. "We must be close," Agnes murmured, more to herself than to us. Her voice echoed strangely in the narrow confines, a haunting reminder of our precarious situation. The businessman stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and fear. "A place forgotten by time," Agnes replied. "It's part of the airport's past, something he wants to keep hidden." As we pressed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that something lurked in the darkness just beyond our sight. The shadows seemed to ripple and shift, playing tricks on my mind. We emerged into a cavernous chamber, the ceiling lost in shadow. It was filled with rows of old, resting chairs and abandoned luggage, relics of an era long past. The air was thick with dust, the stillness oppressive. "This is it," Agnes said, her voice tinged with both triumph and sorrow. "The heart of the terminal." I looked around, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was as if we had stepped into a forgotten world, a place that defied the modern airport above. There was a sense of history here, of stories untold and secrets buried. But why? I asked, feeling the weight of the mystery pressing down. Why hide this place? Agnes sighed, her gaze distant. "The terminal is alive," she said softly. "It feeds on the fear and despair of those who linger too long. This place, this heart, is where it draws its power." The words sent a shiver down my spine. It was a truth that defied reason, yet felt undeniably real in this strange, forgotten chamber. I realized that the terminal, with its flickering lights and eerie echoes, was more than just a building. It was a predator, and we were its prey. "We have to keep moving," Agnes urged. "There's a way out, but it won't be easy." With renewed determination, we pressed on, the exit and freedom still a distant hope. The passage behind us seemed to close in, as if the terminal itself sought to reclaim us. But together, we would face whatever lay ahead, determined to escape its sinister grasp. The passage twisted onward, and the oppressive silence gave way to the distant sounds of scraping and whispering. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced back at the others, their faces pale in the dim light. We were all on edge, the shadows playing tricks on our minds, making us see movements that weren't there, or were they? "Keep moving," Agnes urged, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped us all. She seemed to know more than she let on, but now was not the time for questions. As we pressed forward, the sounds grew louder, an unholy chorus that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, the sense of being watched more palpable than ever. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall ahead, resolving into a figure shrouded in darkness. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. We froze, terror washing over us like a cold wave. The figure advanced slowly, its gaze fixed on us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The passage seemed to close in around us, the air thick with an oppressive malevolence. "What is that?" the young woman asked, her voice trembling as she clutched her child protectively. Agnes stepped forward, her expression resolute. "It's a guardian," she said, "a part of the terminal's defenses. We have to get past it." The figure loomed closer, and I could feel its gaze burning into me, probing the depths of my mind. It was as if it sought to strip away my defenses, to expose my deepest fears and doubts. I took a deep breath, willing myself to move, to act. "We need to go," I said, my voice firmer than I felt, "together." The group nodded, fear giving way to determination. We moved as one, stepping around the figure with cautious speed. Its presence was a tangible weight, a reminder of the terminal's unnatural power. As we passed, the figure turned to follow, its movements slow and deliberate. The air crackled with tension, every step a test of our resolve. I led the way, my heart racing, the passage ahead opening into a vast chamber lit by an ethereal glow. The exit was there, a shimmering portal that promised freedom from this nightmare. "We're almost there," Agnes said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and urgency. "Keep going." We broke into a run, the figure trailing behind us, its presence a shadow that threatened to pull us back into the terminal's grasp. But together, we would escape, driven by the hope of survival and the strength of our shared will. The exit shimmered before us, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness of the terminal. We pushed forward, driven by a desperate need to escape, to break free from the nightmare that had ensnared us. The figure pursued, its presence a constant reminder of the terminal's malevolent power. I could feel its gaze on my back, a chill that spurred me to run faster, to reach the portal before it was too late. Agnes was beside me, her face set with determination. "We can do this," she said. "The terminal won't let us go easily, but we have to try." The chamber seemed to close in around us, the air thick with the terminal's anger. Shadows danced and writhed, reaching out to ensnare us, to drag us back into the depths of the forgotten passageways. I reached the portal first, my heart pounding as I stepped through the shimmering light. It was like stepping into another world, a place where the storm's fury was a welcome reprieve from the oppressive darkness of the terminal. One by one, the others followed, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. We had made it, escaped the terminal's clutches, but the journey had taken its toll. Agnes was the last to step through, her eyes meeting mine with a look of gratitude and resolve. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm, "for believing." We stood together in the rain, the storm washing away the fear and tension of the night. The terminal loomed behind us, its lights flickering ominously as if aware of our escape. I looked around at the group, strangers bound by a shared ordeal. We had faced the darkness together, confronted the unseen forces that sought to trap us, and emerged stronger for it. As we made our way toward the main terminal, the storm began to abate, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. It was a new day, and though the memory of the night's terror would linger, we had survived, our lives forever changed by the experience. I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of the terminal, the hidden secrets that lay within its walls. It was a place of shadows and echoes, a living entity that fed on fear and despair. But we had escaped, and that was enough for now. Together, we stepped into the light, leaving the nightmare behind, determined to face whatever came next with courage and hope. As we emerged from the terminal, the storm finally began to subside, the gray sky giving way to the first rays of sunlight. The rain was now just a gentle drizzle, a relief after the night's intensity. We were all exhausted but alive, and that was a miracle in itself. I looked at the faces of my companions, now less strangers and more allies. Fear had united us, and as we made our way toward the main part of the airport, there was a sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness for the darkness we had left behind. Agnes walked beside me, her gaze distant as if reflecting on what we had faced. "It's strange," she said, breaking the silence, "how something so familiar can hide so much." I nodded, understanding perfectly. The airport, a symbol of travel and new beginnings, had revealed itself to be a place of nightmares, where the unknown lurked in every shadow. "Have you been through this before?" I asked, curious about what she knew. She sighed, a mix of weariness and wisdom in her eyes. "In a way," she replied, "I've been in places where time and space blur, where reality is not as solid as it seems. That's why I knew how to find the way out." Her comments resonated with me, and I realized that her experience was part of what had saved us. "And now?" I asked, "What happens next?" Agnes smiled softly, a smile that was both a farewell and an acknowledgement of something deeper. "Now we live," she said, "with the knowledge that there is more to the world than we can see." That truth, though unsettling, was also liberating. We had faced the terminal and survived, and now we could see the world in a new light, aware of the mysteries that hid beneath the surface of normalcy. As we walked away, something about the terminal caught my attention. The lights, which had been so volatile during the night, flickered again, but this time with an almost benevolent quality. It was as if the terminal was watching us leave, a sinister guardian satisfied for now. I paused and turned, watching the lights dance over the glass and steel. There was a pattern, almost a message, but it faded before I could fully comprehend it. The terminal, with all its secrets, would not easily reveal its purpose. I clung to the relief of the open air, the fresh wind a promise of freedom. There was something ritualistic about our departure, an act of renewal that left us stronger, even in the face of uncertainty about what lay ahead. The other passengers felt it too, a tangible change that spoke of hope. We were more aware, more connected, and determined to carry this experience forward as a reminder that not everything is as it seems. We walked away together, our footsteps echoing into the new reality we now had to face. The world seemed different, more vast, and full of possibilities, even with its hidden shadows. Finally, I looked back one last time, the terminal receding into the distance as we moved forward. Life would go on, with new challenges and opportunities, but now we were prepared to face the unknown. With a final gust of wind, the terminal door closed behind us, and the sound was both a goodbye and an invitation to whatever came next. We knew that what we had experienced that night would change our lives forever, but now we had the courage to move forward, no longer fearing the shadows, but accepting them as part of the world we continued to discover. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the vast expanse of the Australian outback. The air was thick with anticipation as we set up camp, the thrill of the wilderness making my heart race. This was exactly what I needed, an escape from the chaos of city life and a chance to reconnect with nature. Can you believe we're finally here? Jessica's voice cut through the stillness, her excitement palpable. She was my closest friend, a fellow adventurer with a penchant for exploring the unknown. Tom, her partner, nodded with a grin. It's going to be a wild few days out here. He was the practical one, always ready with a plan and a reassuring presence in the unpredictable wilderness. Sophie, the group's resident jokester, added, as long as we don't run into any creepy critters, I'm good. The campfire crackled to life, casting flickering light over our faces as we settled in for the evening. The stars began to pepper the sky, offering a glimpse of infinity above us. Just as we were getting comfortable, a rustling in the bushes drew our attention. A figure emerged from the darkness, a drifter, his clothes dusty and worn, yet his presence strangely magnetic. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice smooth and inviting. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between us. Tom gestured to an empty spot by the fire. Sure, plenty of room. The drifter settled in, his eyes glinting in the firelight. There was something about him that intrigued me, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. As the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival was more than mere coincidence. The night wrapped around us like a blanket, the campfire's warmth a welcome reprieve from the desert chill. We sat in a circle, the drifter seamlessly blending into our group as if he'd always been there. So, what brings you out here? Jessica asked, her skepticism barely concealed. She had never been one to trust easily, especially when it came to strangers in the middle of nowhere. The drifter smiled, his gaze steady, just passing through. The outback's got its own charm, don't you think? I nodded, though a part of me couldn't shake the unease curling in my gut. His stories began innocuously enough, tales of travel and adventure, but soon they took a darker turn. He spoke of disappearances, people vanishing without a trace, swallowed by the vastness of the desert. You never know who you will run into out here, he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite identify. Sophie tried to lighten the mood, sounds like a plot from a horror movie. But her laughter fell flat, the weight of the drifter's words hanging heavily in the air. My mind raced with images, friends lost to the shadows, the desert stretching endlessly beyond our small circle of light. As the night wore on, the drifter's tales etched themselves into my thoughts, an unsettling melody that wouldn't leave. I couldn't help but wonder, what truths lay hidden within his stories, and what dangers did this land truly hold? As the campfire dwindled to embers, a sense of restlessness settled over me. The drifter's stories clung to my mind like cobwebs, their unsettling threads weaving through my thoughts. My friends were asleep, their silhouettes rising and falling with each breath. But I couldn't find peace. The shadows outside seemed alive, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I slipped out of my tent, the cold night air biting against my skin. The outback stretched endlessly around us, a vast sea of darkness broken only by the glimmer of distant stars. I hesitated by the dying fire, drawn to its flickering light. The drifter was still awake, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He sat quietly, watching the night as if it held answers only he could decipher. I approached cautiously. Couldn't sleep either? He turned to me, a knowing smile playing on his lips. The desert has a way of keeping you on edge, he replied. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. It's always watching, always waiting. His words sent a shiver down my spine. The way he spoke, it was as if he knew something we didn't. What brought you to our camp? I asked, hoping for clarity. The drifter's gaze met mine, intense and unyielding. Fate, maybe. Or perhaps it's just the way of things out here. I didn't know what to make of him. As the night wore on, I wondered if we'd ever truly understand the man who had wandered into our lives. Morning broke over the campsite, the sun casting a golden hue across the landscape. The sense of unease from the previous night lingered, but I tried to shake it off. The outback had its mysteries, and perhaps the drifter was just another one of them. I emerged from my tent, stretching to dispel the night's tension. But the moment was short-lived. A panicked shout echoed through the camp, "Sophie's gone!" My heart skipped a beat as I rushed to the others. Her tent was empty, belongings scattered as if she'd left in a hurry. Fear gripped me. Sophie was always the first to rise, her laughter usually the soundtrack to our mornings. Now there was only silence. "We have to find her," Tom said, his voice strained with worry. He and Jessica began searching the perimeter, calling her name into the vast emptiness. The drifter stood off to the side, his expression unreadable. "I can help," he offered, but his involvement was met with suspicion and blame. "Why would you?" Jessica snapped, her distrust palpable. "You barely know us." He shrugged, the movement almost dismissive. "The desert can be unforgiving. If you're not careful, it'll swallow you whole." His words only fueled my unease. Yet, we had no choice. The expanse of the outback was too daunting without help. As we searched, the desert's vastness seemed to mock our efforts, swallowing our shouts in its silence. Each passing hour felt like a lifetime. Sophie was out there, somewhere, and the drifter's presence was a constant reminder of the unknown forces at play. The outback had become a maze of shadows and whispers, where the line between friend and foe blurred into obscurity. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but its warmth offered no comfort. We scoured the area, searching for any sign of Sophie. The drifter moved with us, a shadow among shadows, his presence both a help and a hindrance. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was this man, really? And why had he appeared just as Sophie vanished? Jessica was relentless, her voice hoarse from calling Sophie's name. "We can't just give up," she insisted, her eyes fierce with determination. But I saw the fear lurking beneath her bravado. We were all afraid of what we might find, and what we might not. Tom found a trail of footprints leading away from camp, a small hope in the vast uncertainty. But as we followed, the tracks seemed to shift, as if the desert itself was playing tricks on us. I glanced at the drifter, his face unreadable. "You seem awfully calm about all this," I said, my suspicion growing. He met my gaze, his expression inscrutable. "The outback is unpredictable. Sometimes, it tests you in ways you can't imagine." I didn't know whether to trust him or not, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he let on. As we pressed on, the air grew heavy with tension, each step echoing with the silent question of who among us was truly trustworthy. We were trapped in a labyrinth of doubt and fear, where every shadow whispered secrets and every rustle of wind carried a hint of danger. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a new tension gripped the group. We gathered around the campfire, the day's failures hanging heavily over us. Sophie was still missing, and with each passing hour, hope waned. Tom had been unusually quiet, his usual leadership overshadowed by something else, a secret weighing him down. Jessica and I exchanged worried glances, sensing the shift in him. "Tom," Jessica started, her voice a mix of concern and suspicion, "is there something you're not telling us?" Tom hesitated, his gaze darting to the drifter, then back to us. I thought it was nothing, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I saw Sophie talking to someone before she disappeared. It wasn't the drifter. Shock rippled through me. Why didn't you say anything? I demanded, anger rising alongside fear. Tom looked pained, guilt etched into his features. I didn't want to cause a panic. I thought maybe she just wandered off, you know how she is. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Someone else was out there, someone who had been watching us. And Tom had kept it hidden, letting our fears fester and grow. The drifter's eyes were on me, a knowing look in their depths. Trust is a fragile thing, he said, his words laced with irony. Betrayal tasted bitter on my tongue. The fragile unity of our group was shattered, replaced by doubt and recrimination. We had been so focused on the drifter, we hadn't seen the dangers lurking within our own ranks. As night fell, I realized the true horror of our situation. We were not just lost in the outback. We were lost in a web of lies and deceit, where the lines between friend and foe had blurred beyond recognition. As darkness enveloped the campsite, an eerie silence descended. The desert seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the coming storm. We gathered around the dying campfire, a plan forming amid the tension. We need to draw them out, Tom said, his voice steady now, determination replacing the earlier guilt. Whoever took Sophie, they're still out there. Jessica nodded, her resolve hardening. We use the drifter as bait. Make them think we're vulnerable. The drifter's lips curled into a wry smile. I've been called worse things, he said, his willingness to help surprising. Despite the suspicion surrounding him, his calm demeanor inspired a strange confidence. As we set the trap, my heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and anticipation. The desert was a vast, unforgiving expanse, but it was also a stage where we could turn the tables on our unseen adversary. The plan was simple: create the illusion of chaos, draw the kidnapper in, and then confront him. We scattered around the campsite, hiding among the rocks and shadows, waiting for our quarry to take the bait. In the stillness of the night, every sound was amplified, every rustle of the wind a potential threat. We waited, tense and ready, knowing that this confrontation would determine not only Sophie's fate, but our own as well. The night stretched on, the tension palpable as we lay in wait. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, creeping toward the fire. My heart leaped. We had them. The drifter sprang into action, his presence a blur as he tackled the intruder. In the ensuing struggle, the truth was revealed. The kidnapper was a lone wanderer, a predator of the outback who had been watching us since our arrival. Sophie was found nearby, shaken but unharmed, her ordeal leaving a lingering shadow over our group. The confrontation had been swift, the outcome clear, but the scars it left were deep. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky with hues of hope, we gathered our things, ready to leave the outback behind. Under the southern skies, we had faced the unknown and emerged changed, our bonds strengthened by the fires of adversity and our trust renewed in the light of a new day. I stood in the doorway of my new house, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. The cul-de-sac was quiet, too quiet, as if the neighborhood held its breath, waiting to exhale. My name is Derek Morgan, and I had just moved into this suburban oasis in Atlanta, Georgia. After my divorce, I needed a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of my past haunting me. The first person to greet me was Mrs. Turner, the elderly woman next door. She appeared almost magically on my doorstep, a wide smile on her face and a homemade pie in her hands. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Derek," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "We're all like family here. If you need anything, just let me know." I thanked her, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. There was something in her eyes, a glint that I couldn't quite place. As she left, I watched her walk back to her house, a picturesque cottage surrounded by immaculate gardens. The evening fell, casting long shadows across the street. The quietness of the neighborhood, which I initially found peaceful, now felt oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the houses themselves were alive, observing my every move. My new life in this perfect suburb was just beginning, and already I felt a prickle of unease. The first night in my new home was restless. As I lay in bed, trying to find solace in sleep, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the trees outside. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my mind, but then it grew clearer, like voices murmuring just beyond the edge of perception. I got up, my heart pounding, and checked the windows and doors. Everything was locked, just as I had left it. Yet, the whispers persisted, dancing through the air like an unwelcome lullaby. Determined to uncover the source, I ventured outside, flashlight in hand. The night was still, the air thick with an eerie silence that wrapped around me like a shroud. As I walked the perimeter of my yard, I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering secrets meant only for me. I returned inside, shaken but resolute to dismiss it as my imagination running wild. Yet, as I settled back into bed, the whispers began anew, more insistent this time. Sleep was impossible, my mind trapped in a loop of unease and curiosity. The next morning, I decided to ask Mrs. Turner about the noises, hoping for a logical explanation. Her response was dismissive, a wave of her hand and a soft chuckle. "Oh, those old pipes make all sorts of sounds. You'll get used to it." But her eyes betrayed her words, holding a flicker of something that looked like amusement or perhaps something darker. The whispers continued, undeterred by her reassurances, urging me to delve deeper into the mysteries that lay beneath the surface of this tranquil suburb. Days passed, but the whispers refused to leave me in peace. They seemed to grow stronger at night, like a chorus of voices reaching out from some hidden depth. It was during one of these restless nights that I discovered the hidden compartment in my basement. While moving boxes, my foot hit something unusual on the floor. The sound echoed differently, hollow and metallic. I knelt down, my fingers tracing the edges of a hidden trapdoor. With a mixture of trepidation and curiosity, I pried it open to reveal a small compartment containing a collection of relics, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and a leather-bound journal. The photos were unsettling, blurry images of people standing in front of my house, their expressions lost to time. The clippings spoke of disappearances and strange happenings, all centered around this seemingly idyllic neighborhood. But it was the journal that held my attention, its pages filled with a meticulous account of the area's history and the mysterious disappearances tied to it. The entries were written by someone named Eleanor, detailing her observations and suspicions about the neighborhood and its residents. Her words were a warning, a desperate attempt to document the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. I spent the next few days consumed by the journal, each page pulling me deeper into the neighborhood's sinister past. The more I read, the more I sensed that Mrs. Turner was not just a kindly neighbor, but a key player in whatever was happening here. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, and I realized that my arrival might not have been as random as I believed. I was being drawn into a web of secrets and lies, and there was no turning back. Armed with the knowledge from Eleanor's journal, I set out to learn more about my neighbors. My attempts to strike up casual conversations were met with polite smiles and evasive answers. It was clear that everyone knew more than they were letting on, and my questions were raising eyebrows and suspicions. Mrs. Turner, however, remained a constant presence, always eager to check in on me, always with that same disarming smile. Her visits left me feeling watched and unnerved, as if she was gauging my progress in uncovering the truth. One evening, I attended a neighborhood watch meeting, hoping to glean more information. The room was filled with familiar faces, all pretending normalcy but with eyes that lingered too long and whispers that fell silent when I approached. The meeting itself was uneventful, a thinly veiled pretense of community concern. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a shared knowledge that everyone was in on but me. I noticed the knowing glances exchanged whenever Mrs. Turner spoke, and the way the room seemed to hang on her every word. Afterward, as I lingered near the exit, one of the neighbors, a man named Sam, approached me. "You're new here, Derek. Just keep your head down and don't ask too many questions. It's easier that way." His words were meant as friendly advice, but they carried a warning. I was treading dangerous ground. The facade of suburban tranquility was beginning to crack, and I felt the weight of its hidden secrets pressing down on me, urging me to uncover the truth despite the risks. Determined to uncover the truth, I installed hidden cameras around my home, hoping to capture any unusual activity. The nights grew longer as I pored over footage, looking for signs of what I suspected was a dark conspiracy within the neighborhood. My research led me to the local archives, where I discovered stories that mirrored those in Eleanor's journal. The neighborhood had a history of unexplained disappearances, always dismissed as accidents or unrelated incidents. But the pattern was undeniable. All the missing persons had ties to this very block. One night, as I reviewed the latest footage, I noticed something odd. Mrs. Turner visiting my yard, standing still in the shadows for several minutes before quietly slipping away. Her presence was both unsettling and revealing. She was monitoring me, confirming my suspicion that she played a central role in whatever was happening here. With this newfound urgency, I doubled my efforts, searching for any evidence that would link her to the disappearances. I uncovered a local legend about a group that called themselves the Sirens, who supposedly kept the neighborhood safe through dark rituals, offering newcomers like myself as sacrifices to maintain their control. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more proof. The neighborhood's history and the whispers at night suggested a network of secrets far larger than I had imagined. I realized that the danger was not just within the confines of my home, but all around me, and every nodding smile and friendly wave. The Sirens were real, and Mrs. Turner was their leader. Armed with the knowledge of the Sirens' existence, I knew I had to act carefully. I began discreetly documenting everything: the footage, the journal entries, and my observations. Each piece of evidence was a small step towards uncovering the truth, but also a risk that could put me in grave danger. I needed to confront Mrs. Turner to see if her veneer of sweetness would crack under pressure. Gathering my courage, I knocked on her door one afternoon, armed with the journal and a voice recorder hidden in my pocket. She welcomed me in with that same inviting smile, her house filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies. But as I sat down, I noticed something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition or perhaps a challenge. "I've been reading about the history of this neighborhood," I began cautiously, gauging her reaction. "It's quite fascinating." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her facade. "Oh, the stories people tell," she replied smoothly. "But we all have our traditions, don't we?" Her words sent a chill down my spine. It was an admission, albeit a subtle one. She knew about the Sirens, and her role was more than just a passive participant. Our conversation turned into a psychological chess match, each of us testing the other's resolve. I realized then that I was in over my head, facing not just a neighborhood conspiracy but a carefully orchestrated operation designed to protect their dark secrets at any cost. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was running out of time to expose the truth before I became their next victim. The confrontation with Mrs. Turner left me more determined than ever. Her veiled admission fueled my resolve, and I knew it was time to take decisive action. I spent the next few days meticulously compiling my evidence, knowing that every detail counted. I set up a meeting with a local reporter, someone who could help expose the truth. But before that, I needed one last piece of evidence, something undeniable that would shatter the illusion of suburban bliss that the Sirens had crafted. Late one night, I decided to follow Mrs. Turner, tracking her movements through the neighborhood. She led me to a hidden grove at the edge of town, a place that seemed forgotten by time. There, under the pale moonlight, I watched as she and a group of neighbors gathered, their figures cloaked in shadows. The ritual was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a chilling mix of chanting and offerings to an altar built from the very earth. My heart pounded as I recorded the scene, each moment affirming the reality of the Sirens and their dark deeds. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, and Mrs. Turner looked directly at my hiding spot. Panic surged through me. I had been discovered. In that instant, I knew I had to flee, to protect the evidence and myself. I raced back to my car, adrenaline fueling my escape as Mrs. Turner's words echoed in my mind. "We all have our traditions." Back home, I reviewed the footage I'd captured, feeling a mix of triumph and dread. The evidence was irrefutable, a testament to the sinister truth hidden beneath the surface of this neighborhood. I contacted the reporter, arranging to meet at a public location where I would be safe. With the evidence securely backed up and my heart pounding in anticipation, I headed to the agreed spot, my mind racing with the possibilities of what might happen next. Exposing the Sirens would not only save me, but also protect any future newcomers from falling victim to their dark rituals. As I handed the evidence to the reporter, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The relief was palpable, though tempered by the knowledge that my life here was irrevocably changed. The facade of suburban tranquility had been shattered, leaving in its place a raw truth that could no longer be ignored. News of the siren's exposure spread quickly, the neighborhood thrown into chaos as media descended upon the cul-de-sac. Mrs. Turner was arrested, her carefully constructed world unraveling in the harsh light of public scrutiny. I watched from a distance, feeling both vindicated and haunted by what I had uncovered. The days that followed the siren's exposure were a blur of police investigations and media frenzy. My once quiet neighborhood was now a hotbed of activity, with reporters and curious onlookers flooding the streets. The truth had come to light, and the idyllic facade of suburban life lay in ruins. I watched as Mrs. Turner was led away in handcuffs, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of defiance and resignation. Her downfall was complete, yet the victory felt bittersweet. The darkness that had lurked beneath the surface was now exposed, but at a cost I had never imagined. As the dust settled, I packed my belongings, ready to leave the neighborhood and its haunting memories behind. The experience had changed me, leaving me wary of the places we assumed to be safe. Before I left, I found a note slipped under my door, written in a familiar hand, "The sirens are everywhere." It was a chilling reminder that the reach of such darkness was vast, suggesting that my battle might be far from over. As I drove away from the cul-de-sac, I realized that the truth I uncovered would always be with me, a constant whisper urging me to question, to dig deeper, and to never again take the world at face value. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.